Okay, guys, we're going to talk about now the Townshend Act and the Boston Massacre. I'm going to go over a little bit of background. So if you remember, all of this really started with the French and Indian War / 7 Years' War / whatever you want to call it. They're all bad names for it. But that battle that really began over the Ohio Valley area, which the British ended up winning and pushing the French away and, saying, we've now controlled this area, but then agreeing with the Native Americans and saying, these settlers, now you can't go to the Ohio Valley. So the settlers, the colonists, are like, we just fought a war to be able to go that direction. And the British are like, we just fought a war to protect you and be human beings, don't take their land. We're safe from the French. We just can't go westward. Oh, by the way, colonists, we went into a lot of debt to fight this war for you, so you need to kind of help pay for it. And the colonists are like, hey, we can't go to this land. Why are we going to pay taxes for it? And what you really need to realize is there were taxes that the colonists were to be paying. What you also have to realize is the colonists were really good at avoiding paying for them. There wasn't, before this time, really a British way of enforcing taxes be paid. And if nobody's forcing you to do something, you're really not likely to do it. So when they brought in the sugar tax and the stamp tax, these were really the first true actions of the British government saying, we are going to force you to pay this tax. And of course, this didn't really go well for the British. It ended up costing them more to actually collect on the tax than what they were collecting in tax funds. Because the colonists boycotted, found other ways around the tax, because, again, they were really good at doing that. So the British then start thinking, how do we tax the colonies without having them boycott absolutely everything that we do? And there was this guy, Lord Townshend. He said, don't worry, guys. I got this. No, he didn't actually say it, but that is actually a painting of Lord Townshend there. What ends up happening is we have the Townshend Acts. What are they? Well, they're new taxes. But instead of being the things that were already in the colonies, such as sugar and stamps and things like that the colonies made themselves and then were taxing, the things that were now taxed were the things that were imported from England into the colonies. So glass, tea, paper, lead, all of these items were actually manufactured in Britain and brought to the colonies. So the British were actually taxing British citizens for British goods, but only those British citizens that lived in the colonies. And, these items, glass, tea, paper, lead, this was really important stuff to the people in the colonies. So to expect them not to get angry over it is kind of foolhardy. It was almost like the British said, let's up the ante and let's see if we can really make them mad instead of let's see how we can work this out. So what do the colonists do? Well, they boycott again. It was successful before, so why wouldn't we do it again? They start finding other ways of making tea and using other items instead of paper. So again, the colonists found the way around the tax. And again, the British found that their money that they were making from these goods went down significantly. So the boycotts were successful. And so the result was the same as previous taxes. They ended up being repealed because they were more harmful to collecting money for the British than what they were successful. They repealed it all except for one item, tea. Now, I put foreshadowing here because I think if anybody knows any of the history of the American Revolution and the lead up to it, this tea is going to play a very important, or there's a very important event that has to do with tea. And you have to understand, culturally, tea is to Britain as Starbucks is to America. This is, you're putting a special tax on something that, while not vital to life, it is something that made them feel British. It was a cultural item. So It wasn't so much that it was a need item, it was more of kind of a slap in the face. We're going to keep taxing this particular thing that connects you. So by this point, all these things had gone down. Taxes, boycotts, repeal, more taxes, boycotts, repeal. Temperatures are high. And Boston is the hotbed where all of this is going on. So by 1770, just 7 years after the end of the 7 Years' War, we've got 9,000 British soldiers in the colonies. 4,000 of them are in one city. That's how much British really were trying to stomp out what was going on in Boston. So then comes March 5th, 1770. You can see the painting here of this absolute bloody massacre as you see at the very top of the page. You've got the redcoats, the lobsterbacks, shooting this crowd of people, plumes of smoke. You've got the Boston Massacre. But what really is happening here is the colonists are calling the British soldiers names. They're throwing snowballs and rocks and running into them, knocking them down. And finally, the British soldiers were provoked too far, and they ended up shooting some of the colonists. And this painting here is by Paul Revere. Yes, it's that Paul Revere who was famous for his ride, which we'll talk about later on. But this was propaganda. And what I mean by that is this painting was used to spark other colonists in other colonies. So, because when you look at that picture, it looks like lots and lots of people were murdered. Well, really, 3 colonists died on the spot. 2 others died a few days later. I'm not saying 5 people isn't worth getting up in arms about, but when you look at the Paul Revere painting, it looks like people are just lined up and shot after shot and killing a lot of people. Only 5 people really died. The first of which is Crispus Attucks. He was an African-American sailor. He is thought of as the first casualty for the fight for freedom in the colonies of the Revolutionary War. The war hasn't actually been declared at this point, but he's given credit as that first casualty. And what happens is Revere's painting is put in the Boston paper, and then it starts spreading throughout the colonies as this sign that the British are willing to attack their own citizenship, that they're not treating us right. We've been taxed, and now they're killing us. It was used as a flashpoint to try to get other people to say, hey, there's something wrong, we need to do something else about it. And ultimately you can see how all these seeds start building towards the actual Revolutionary War. So really, the Revolutionary War is in 2 big parts. You have everything that leads up to the war, and then you have the battles that actually take part in the war. And I think when you really look at the history of it, the lead-up's a lot more interesting than the actual battles themselves. That's all I have for you today. Thank you guys. Stay warm, stay safe.